Welcome back to BarryTsGarage. I'm glad you joined us. So we're calling these Ed Answers, and we are answering questions you have asked on our previous videos. Sometimes Ed wanders into a subject, it opens the door to questions, and we welcome all those questions. We answer them best we can in the comment section, but also we try to gather some of those together for Ed and get his exact words as opposed to me kind of relaying it or coming up with an answers that Ed may have told me earlier. So here we go. Thanks for coming. We appreciate everyone that comments, subscribes, likes things, all those YouTube things. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. And without any more delay, I'm going to go get Ed. Let's get started. All right, Ed, we've got some more questions people have asked. And it's very generous of you to take the time to answer questions. And I thank you for that. And the people back watching are going to be thankful for that. So thank you.
Sure. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. It
Yes,
is morning.
What a good day.
It is a great day. It's a great day. There's a lot of people said, man, if I could just hang out with Ed Smith, just follow him around for a day or a week or a month. So I have the privilege of hanging out with you a little bit this morning. It is a good morning.
Okay, good.
All right, here we go. So I've grouped together some of these questions so we have a batch of questions here, okay? The first batch I picked up happens to be about high volume oil pumps. We did a video a little while back and you mentioned that a high volume pump can sometimes be a problem. And maybe the first thing to do is just generally, let's just pick up on that. Why can high volume oil pumps actually be a problem in an engine?
Well, actually, you have two different things, a high volume pump and a high pressure pump.
Pressure, right.
A high volume pump usually is a small block Chevy, like some of those HV pumps.
Okay.
It's right on that HV 55 was a millings pump.
Okay.
And the gears are longer.
Oh.
Actually, they're about a 1/4 inch longer. So it gives you a little bit more volume, a bigger blade to surface oils. But it goes right back to the same thing sometimes. And there is two different screens. There's one's got a bigger screen than the other one.
Okay.
Actually, a pickup and the holes in it, stuff like this. But it goes back into the motor, the same size hole in the motor, until you start doing something with that.
Okay.
So with a high volume pump or even high pressure pump, we need to get more oil flowing to the engine.
Okay.
So in the oil filter, there's a little aluminum adapter that screws on the screw-on filter in a stock. We're talking stock motors.
Stock.
We're not talking a dart motor or somebody like this.
Sure.
It's got really some weird, not weird, but computerized oil circuits in a dart aluminum motor.
I see.
And the big motor, the high dollar motor.
So that's another
aftermarket motors.
Right. So the dart engines and stuff, that's a different thing.
We're not talking about them. We're just talking about the small block Chevy.
Yep.
So you need to the hole in the block where the oil filter goes, we might grind that out a little bit, like port and polish in that hole. The filter goes back in between the filter and the main bearing.
And that just allows the oil to flow easier?
A little better, yeah.
Okay.
And then when you put that aluminum thing in there, you want to, it's got a valve, a little spring-loaded valve in there. You'd like to turn that away from that hole when you install it, so that's not in the way of stopping the oil flow to that hole going to the main bearing.
Right.
Then we go back to the main bearings. We might drill those holes a little bit bigger, but chamfer them. And one of the guys said something about chamfering the crankshafts. Of course, we do the crankshafts all the time. It has almost a flat hole coming on the crankshaft that oils the bearing. So we would make that longer on the crank with a grinder, with a small hand grinder, and make it longer so it oils instead of 360 degrees.
Yeah.
It will oil the bearing a lot longer with a longer hole.
Right, yeah, because there's more area of a hole basically touching the
lengthwise.
Yeah.
And also widthwise too.
Okay.
We'd like to oil the whole bearing instead of just 1/4 inch streak around the bearing.
Right.
You do some of that stuff in how clearance in the oil, your crankshaft clearance.
Okay.
And so, and then the clearances start into the wrist pins and things like this all have something to do with it.
Okay.
And side clearance on the things. We like to run, I've always said that we like to run, they say in the minimum is 10, 12 thousandths side clearance a rod. Okay. I'll run 35 or 40 thousandths because I want the oil to go out and do its job as a bearing surface, because the connecting rod bearing is not even supposed to touch the crank.
Oh, okay.
It shouldn't touch the crank at all. The crank should not touch the main bearings. They should be floating in oil.
That little cushion of oil should be in
that
between.
cushion of oil. What kind of oil you use is it's different too.
Yeah.
You have to talk to the oil people
Right.
a little bit about that. But so anyways, to tighten up that clearance on there, and you wouldn't need a high volume pump as much.
I see.
But now some of the old people say, well, 2,500, 2 or 2,500, that's quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
That was in the older days, when we were trying to get something to run. But we'd like to have, and I know the professional people run as far as less than 1,000ths on the rod clearance.
Wow.
But they got the new oil too.
Yes.
And the new oil is something that we know very little about. Almost every day you get new oils from the oil people.
Right.
And different words for it, different names for it, and different 10Ws this and
0W8 or something
like this. Yeah. And it's so the same thing. And we used to say in the 60s and 70s, 40 pounds of oil pressure, 5,000 RPMs. It takes 35, 40 horsepower to turn an oil pump.
Wow, that's a lot.
That's a lot because it's thick oil.
Mm-hmm.
You can already turn it by hand.
Right, it's so thick.
And that's just
Pushing
an
it.
egg beater in the batter and making a fried egg or something.
Right.
So you imagine how much that oil pump.
Mm-hmm.
So we would just as soon, and also that's run by the distributor gear. And that's all running on the distributor and also running on the camshaft. So it wears that gear out and it wears the cam out.
Yeah.
Now you got in where you want to run a bronze gear on the distributor or not, and what you want to do with that. Now, I'll answer one of the other questions if the one guy wants to read it. That's why we take a distributor. We take a hacksaw and cut the distributor. It's on one of my videos.
Yeah.
Cut a little slot
Yep.
in the lower shaft of the distributor, in the aluminum part.
Yep.
You have to take a, and because the gears are angled, so you can't cut it at an angle. And we usually go about the width of a hacksaw blade and the same depth. So that little groove is about a square groove.
Yeah.
And that 60 pounds or whatever pounds of oil pressure in the distributor shaft will squirt oil right on the cam gear.
Ah.
So it all helps.
Yes. Okay.
So we go back to maybe the high volume pump, and the high volume pump ain't necessarily, but sometimes then you get into oil pan.
Okay.
Now you need a bigger oil pan.
Right. And I think we were talking earlier about when you have a high pressure or high volume pump, it's sending more oil up in the top of the engine.
High volume would, fill the valve covers full.
Okay.
So somewhat.
That could be a problem,
Yes.
obviously, I guess.
And that goes back to our motors then. And if we go in the back of the cylinder head and we start polishing the intake or polishing the cylinder head around the oil grooves and down, and the block especially, I think over my earlier videos where we put the head gasket on the block, and there's got two round holes at the top part of the head gasket where the oil returns,
Yeah.
for the cylinder head oil, to make sure they're not casted over. And then down the back of the block, we might shine that up with a grinder, polish it up.
Okay.
And there's a couple holes in the back of the block, one by the distributor. Sometimes they're really small, and you can easily make them almost the size of a quarter,
Okay.
and that oil return back in the pan.
And this is a hole that's sending the oil back without splashing on the crankshaft.
Yes, on the rear of the motor without splashing on the crank.
Yeah.
And then at that same time, we would plug those breather holes there and tap them out, not plug them, but tap them out around the cam going forward up to the front of the engine.
Yeah.
And you can put a small pipe plug.
Yeah, standpipes, right?
Standpipes.
Right.
You can buy a set of brass ones from somebody, or you can just screw your own in.
There's no real spec for those, just something maybe a couple inches, an inch and a half or
tall.
something?
Yeah, just to keep that flow from running down on the crank.
I see.
And then that same one where we run that oil down past the distributor, down on that little flat spot on the back of the block, down by the oil pan gasket, we drill that extra hole.
Okay.
So it drains back down without hitting the crank.
I see.
So it's all the best you can do. Yeah, all you can do is keep working at it and do the best you can do. Yeah.
Right. Well, good. Well, another question related to this is someone's talking about the fact that just putting a bigger pump doesn't necessarily help as much as maybe you should be finding the bottleneck where the oil is restricted.
Well, that's what I just said.
Yeah.
That hole around where the oil filters.
So that's one of the big
polish
deals.
that up a little bit and stuff, and
Okay.
and then and we can touch a little bit on. I've never done a small block. Small block main bearings are too small.
Okay.
There's a big block Chevy 454s. That oil hole that goes from the oil thing in the block, it goes out to the main bearing.
Yep.
Well, we'll put a freeze plug in that.
Oh, really?
On a big block Chevy,
Uh-huh.
454, we'll put a little freeze plug in that so the oil pressure does not, from the oil filter to the main bearing, so that oil pressure is not pushing on the main bearing itself.
Oh, really?
Because now you got 60 pounds of oil pressure pushing that main bearing out onto the crankshaft.
Huh.
So if you just inspect that a little bit, I don't know if I've ever had a video that showed that.
Yeah, I don't think
But
we
we
have.
would drive a little freeze plug on the before you put the main bearing in,
I see.
and just plug that hole. There's a little comfort in that.
You mentioned just really quickly about a larger pan. We've had a couple of people ask about using a bigger pan if you've got a stronger oil pump.
Yes.
So what kind of spec, how common is it to put a bigger oil pan in?
Oil pan's good, or drag racing, especially with a door in it, a trap door.
Okay.
It swings back and forth, because when you get to the end of the quarter, you're going 130 miles an hour per se, or more.
Yeah.
And you jam the brakes on. The oil will go up in the engine, and you have to have a compartment there with a swing door in it,
Okay.
and that door would close and keep the oil around the oil pump.
Oh,
Other than that,
interesting.
you put the brakes on, that oil from the pan goes up through the big pan, up into the crankshaft, and clear up into the timing chain.
Wow.
And then the oil pump would be dry
right.
until you actually stop at the end of the drag race and turn it around and let the oil come back down again.
Okay.
So that's why, in our dirt track cars, the pan's always on the right side. And we put a whole extension on the side of the pan.
Oh,
It
because
holds
of
a couple more quarts, and we also put a special fill screen, and that screen will go into that oil pan on the right side, out into that addition you put on.
Okay. Does
So
that
it
act
sucks
like
oil.
does the screen act like a baffle?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Very-
we've had some of the other ones that I don't think I have one here hanging someplace, but we have taken a piece of tin, talk about oil on the crankshaft when we mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
The oil, we've had some indication that after so many thousand RPMs, the oil would cling to the crankshaft. So we've had some instances where we've made, several years ago when I was building some of our motors and things,
Mm-hmm.
we put a piece of tin in the pan gasket, a long tin, piece of the length of a pan,
Right.
and cut it and trimmed it. Took a while with thin strips and cut it so it just misses the cam, misses the crankshaft, and misses the connecting rod. So it looks like a comb you'd comb your hair with,
Right.
sticking out into the crankshaft area, and it wipes all that oil away from the crank.
Okay. Right. Very
Yeah.
good.
So it cleans that oil up.
All right. Next question. Someone said they wanted your opinion about this. Someone had said that a rule of thumb, kind of an idea, is 10 psi per 1,000 RPM.
That's a good idea.
Is that
yeah.
a pretty good?
Yeah, that's a rule of thumb. Yeah, that's
Okay.
always been. Yeah,
All right.
that's all good.
Next person, called What About Bob, said he wouldn't run a wet sump motor over 6,500 RPM. What are your thoughts on that, using a dry sump?
He said he would not run
A wet sump more than 6,500 RPM, maybe because of what you were just talking about.
and even the dry sump now, we're going to get in a little bit of technology,
Okay.
a little bit, you might have to ask, but it's an oil pump, oil pans now.
Okay, right.
If you got a pan full of oil
Yep.
and you start to rivet the engine up a lot, something's got to displace that oil in the pan.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to go up into the motor somewhere.
Yep.
Then there's where we have our vacuum pumps.
Okay.
So now we put a vacuum pump on our junior fuel car with, maybe it sucks with actually a smog pump.
Really?
And we'll hook it up to a vacuum. Yeah, so it's pressure in the pan with vacuum sucking pressure in the whole engine.
Wow. So literally putting negative pressure on the top to
That's
suck
right.
it back down.
Yes. So with that in there, with 3 pounds, the motor, the dragster might go 3 or 4 miles an hour faster. So we raised it up to 7 pounds of suction from the motor's under suction. At the same time now, NASCAR for a while back took the rear main seal out of the motors, or put a special rear main seal in so the rear main seal would suck air in.
Really?
It was like a flapper.
Okay.
Yeah, so it sucked air into the rear main seal, so it displaced that oil in the oil pan.
Okay. Well, instead of a crankcase ventilation,
Yes.
okay.
Instead of ventilating, they put under pressure.
Okay.
Under suction, not pressure, excuse me.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
that was all good stuff.
Someone named Tommy Jenkins, I guess, Just making another comment about oil movement. He says he put pipe cleaners in the push rods so that the oil wouldn't get all the way to the top.
That's correct.
You've done that?
We've done that before, and even I don't think you can buy a push rods that I know of with a smaller hole in them.
Uh-huh.
But the main thing in there, he has to, whatever, is that we'd like to put a solid push rod in there that don't have holes in it, because now you've got that push rod full of oil and you've got that push rod full of pipe cleaner.
Okay.
And it's full of oil because it did pump oil up in there.
Right. So
it just slows it down.
Thank you for joining us once again for another Ed's Answers episode. Keep sending in your questions. Thank you so much for commenting with those questions, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.